Hey everybody, Bear Tracker Nature Films here, and I'm coming to you from the river bar of the South Fork Yule River, where I've found a really cool combination of tracks. On the right here, we have a set of mountain lion tracks, and over here, we have a set of dog tracks. They were right next to each other, so I thought this placement was really perfect to demonstrate the differences between these two tracks. Here's a ruler for scale, and 3-inch mark is about there. So you can see how long, approximately maybe 3.5 inches long on the mountain lion track. And this hind track of the dog over here, about 3 inches or so. So dog tracks and mountain lion tracks get confused quite often. And looking at these two next to each other, you can see why. They both have 4 toes, and they both have a pad. They're about the same size. Depends on the species of dog, breed of dog. But those things really can make these tracks get confused quite often. So what I'm looking at here is a hind track over here of a dog and a front track of a dog, and over here is the I think that's the hind track. Yep, that's the hind track. And the front track's over here. It's kind of underneath this, stepped on this plant, so it's not that good, but you can see dirt transfer right there that indicates there was a track there. So the way this mountain lion is walking is it's walking in a walk, and its hind track is overstepping the front. So on this track, one thing you notice right away is if you were to draw a line right across the leading edge of these toes, that this toe is further ahead than that toe. So that's a characteristic of mountain lions, the asymmetry, whereas on dogs they're way more symmetrical. If you draw a line across the leading edge of those toes, they're right next to each other, they're lined up. So the same thing can be said here on this front track, which is a little bit harder to tell. That's my cat. He's out here walking with me, and we just trailed this mountain lion down the river bar and found where it left the river bar. So anyway, he's going to get in the light now too. Okay, so the negative space doesn't show up very well here because neither of these tracks went into the soil. It got rained on. It's sand, and it's very firm because it did get rained on. So neither one of them pushed into the soil with any depth to show the negative space. But the main characteristic to look for is that asymmetry. Also look at the size of this pad here. This is the metatarsal pad on the hind foot, and compare that to the size of the metatarsal pad on the dog. So here's the approximate length of the one on the dog. And then you look at the width here, it's approximately here to here. And so the cougar, length and width-wise, is larger than the dog track. The other thing to note is the size of these toes. So the size of the toes of the dog are quite large. And if you were to use your imagination and pick up these toes and stick them all inside the space of this pad right here, you'd be able to fit maybe 1 or 2. If you did the same thing with the mountain lion track and imagine picking up these toes and placing them inside the space occupied by this pad here, you could put almost all of them in there. 3.5 maybe. So that's another difference, is the large size of this pad in relation to the size of the toes on the mountain lion versus the smaller size of the pad in relation to the larger toes on the dog track. So on this front foot of the dog, I think that's my thumb accidentally, you can see that there is a larger pad on that one, so that can lead to some confusion. The other thing to note here is that there's sort of a raised bump in the center here, and that's characteristic of your dogs, the negative space on the dogs. I'm going to turn this around, because this is the direction that track is actually heading. So you note the symmetry here. If you draw your lines across those toes, they're very symmetrically oriented. And you can't say the same thing on the mountain lion. On the dog, you can definitely say there's symmetry here. So use your ruler, use some straight edge, like a stick, and you can line up those toes. Whereas on the mountain lion, if you do that, you'll see a little portion of that toe is sticking up. Let me turn the camera around again. Anyway, that's just a little introduction. These are not the best tracks, but a lot of times this is the type of track you're going to find. I just trailed this mountain lion for at least a 1/4 mile down the river bar, and that's one of the better tracks. The rest of them look like this. Just little flattenings in the ground. So front track here, hind track there. Not a very good trail, but they're fairly faint and hard to see. If you look ahead, you can see some of them up there on the river bar, and I'll show you how. So by zooming in a little bit, you can see what I'm seeing here. From a distance, you can see that the soil has been flattened. The soil around it has been rained on and is sort of pockmarked. But if you look ahead to those tracks, notice how they pop out when you're at a low angle like this. We call that shine. It's a difference in the reflection of the light, because where the mountain lion stepped, the soil has been flattened, and so it's reflecting the light. Much different than the soil around it, which is scattering the light all over the place. A little further up gets a little bit more difficult, but it's right there. And then even further up beyond that one, there's one right there, the tip of my finger, and so on and so on. So that's one of the tricks we use to look ahead and find the tracks, especially in an environment like this. We look at the shine. So shine being a difference in the reflectivity of the light off the track itself, and that's just because where the track is, the soil is compacted, and around it, it's not. So that's one thing to look for if you're out here trailing animals. I hope you've enjoyed this little introduction to mountain lion versus dog tracks, and hope that you find some in your own travels out there and are able to tell them apart. These are very frequently confused. Probably the biggest question I get is this a mountain lion or is this a dog? And I get a whole bunch of emails with tracks, and a lot of times they're dogs. And now you can see why, because the characteristics of these tracks make them kind of tough to differentiate unless you looked at a whole bunch of them. Well, hope you've enjoyed, and see you next time.